Really? Exactly. Come forward, guys.
You need to talk into your mic.
Yeah, which is no, exactly. Yeah. What you exactly? Okay. One. This whole thing is a text.
Just it the way you want.
Okay.
Do you want to test it? Say hello.
Let me just get something. Testing. Making sure the wine is in the glass. Has everyone got something to drink? It's very important. Yeah, sure, I'm going to. Okay, right. Any more? Hello, good evening. Can you hear? Yeah, okay, you can all hear me. Welcome to the Frontline Club. I'm Rob York, a broker facilitator of environmental dialogue. It's a specialized role in creating space across a broad church of environmental narratives, some of which may compete against each other. With another hat, I'm also a rural chartered surveyor, and for the record, I'm not a journalist per se, but I have journalistic tendencies in being curious and inquisitive and resisting groupthink. So there's no more perfect place than to be at the Frontline Club, which is a hub for diverse groups of people united by the passion for quality, independent journalism. On that note, we acknowledge those brave journalists who are risking their lives, and some of them losing their lives, in reporting on wars around the world. We live in incoherent, uncharted times: climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, energy security crisis, food security crisis, cost of living crisis. Alas, we only have 1.5 hours, and thus we will focus this discussion on environmental issues around farming, food, wildlife conservation, animal welfare, land use, hunting, tree planting, non-exclusive. Some of you may be a little bit surprised that climate isn't in the room, when of course it does dominate the room. The IPCC's report 3 came out yesterday. There's still much to digest. The science is certain, but how we work on the interdisciplinary, tough choice issues being implemented across socio-economic, socio-ecological, socio-political, cultural, global framing is another point. And I think that's probably for another day. This event is very much going to be an experimental pilot, so thank you very much for turning up to be the guinea pigs. I want to make it dynamic, interactive by rotating people onto the stage to interact with the audience. And it reminds me of when I was once asked to chair a debate at last minute. It was all about pollinators, and it had been organized by Friends of the Earth. There was an MP there, and there were people from Bayer and Syngenta and wildlife ecological scientists. And I looked around the room, and the MP said, "I've got to leave now." And I said, "Right, okay, everyone take your badges off, because I want 60 seconds from all of you in the room, all about why you love and what you know about pollinators, but do not say for who you work. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to slightly take us out of our comfort zone. So the house rules are be robust, be pithy, be respectful, no mission statements. This is not 8:10 on Radio 4 when a politician is trying to talk out that last 5 minutes of time. I will be a tough moderator. I will ask provocative questions. You can obviously push back against me as well. I will try and be unbiased and independent, though of course some of you may perceive me to be anything but. I don't think Michael Gove, George Monbiot, Ben Goldsmith and Tony Juniper, all of whom I interviewed over the last few years, enjoyed some of my questions when they were nothing like the ones I said I would ask them. So this is maybe about disrupting some of the possibly hackneyed narratives around environmental issues to get at the nub of this event. So without further ado, let's have the first two random witnesses for the situation report on, is there space for nuance in environmental journalism? Now, I haven't decided who the first two are, so this is going to be very quick. Olivia, please, would you like to come to the stage? Andrew, please come to the stage. Thank you very much indeed. I'll just wait for. Okay, so we've got one microphone. Okay, I'm going to pitch one question in, and then we're just going to we're going to see where it runs from there. And then I'm going to ask you as the audience. We may have something on Zoom at some point. I'm not sure if I'll be able to spot it in time. Now it's up to you as to what you say, where you're from. But I'm going to just kind of pitch the first question in. Is the environment in your eyes or in your readers' eyes, is it rising up the agenda? Is it something that people are talking about rather than just being reported about?
Yes, in a word. Is that pithy enough? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to say I work for the Telegraph, so we might not be viewed by a lot of people. I know we're not necessarily talking about climate change specifically as being a paper that has put that at the forefront of their coverage, but certainly in terms of nature, the natural world, rural issues, farming, gardeners. We have our readers are massively interested in gardening, and I think increasingly concerned about what they see with their own eyes that is happening around them in their gardens, in the fields that they walk in the kind of the natural environment in this country that we love so much. So yes, absolutely, and I think I see my job as sort of trying to communicate it to them in a way that they're going to kind of understand and be receptive to. So yeah.
Andrew, so you pass it over. It is the same question to you. Now you work in a slightly different area. You're not a journalist. So. No, but that's good because that's the whole purpose, is to get diverse voices in the room and to hear all the different angles. So within your area, is environment, which is maybe an obvious question because if you say for whom you work, but with your perception, is environmental stuff rising up in the kind of public consciousness?
Yes, I work for an NGO. I work for the Zoological Society of London, looking at conservation projects both domestically and internationally. I would say absolutely it's rising up the agenda. In an interesting way though, and I'm sure we'll get onto it because I don't know if this is a UK thing or a global thing, but it's become increasingly confrontational. So there's depth around care for the environment, but it's quite, or it seems to me to be quite a patrician care, a sort of care through ownership or being at the top of the tree rather than in balance with nature. And I think, you and I were at an event recently where an MP spoke about, we must have a diverse nature, absolutely critically important because it's here to serve man. And that was a very, and there was lots of sort of quoting to justify said opinion, and okay, but this sense of balance and harmony is not there. And at the moment, it's become increasingly polarized. And I think that's a dangerous territory to be in. For me as a conservationist, thinking about how do we mainstream nature into all of our decision making. We're going to have this debate right now about the future of energy. We are having it, and it's playing out, where nature has to be mainstreamed and put alongside some pretty other hefty decisions we're going to make. How we view our position in nature is going to be vital. And at the moment, it's not quite in balance.
Yeah. But do you feel that's quite a hard debate to have when cost of living is something which is high on the agenda of a lot of people? And is the environmental discussion, got to be careful how I put this, but a middle class thing? So they've got enough time and they can afford to think about the environment, whereas those people on lower incomes have household bills which don't allow them to think about environmental decisions. And we will talk about food choices possibly at some point this evening.
Do you want me to? I mean, I can just very quickly, and then I'll
Yeah. And any questions from you guys?
So
or any add-ons?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm coming from a position of privilege, and I've had privilege to be able to spend time thinking about these things. But and there's a big problem with the environmental movement as well, is that it's a niche area, and there's a niche section of society typically running it. I'm from it, so I have to fess up to that. But if we're going to be successful, we have to get over that, and we will constantly deal with crises of one sort or another in society in our daily lives. And yet the really big one is still coming down the road, and it will continue to come down the road. And so we're going to have to make horrible short-term choices that I don't want to make and others don't want to make, and wealthy people definitely don't want to make. And we're going to have to make them.
Right. So when you say the big one's coming down the road, what exactly did you mean by that?
A climate-driven one.
Exactly. Okay, the one thing we're not talking about, but I think that's another subject. Sorry, yes, Olivia, and then any...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just on that point about kind of, do people have time to think about it? I would say that actually just, it's a policy question. So I think actually the way that from a policy perspective, the government could be approaching this to be the most helpful would be to ensure that people don't have to think about it, would be to make it the cheapest and the easiest option. And that is something that, we need to be kind of pulling the right levers, making it easy, making it obvious, because we can't just expect. There is a minority in society who are going to make those decisions even if they're harder or more expensive because they care that much. But I think we have to face up to the fact that that isn't everybody, and it shouldn't. People have other concerns, as you say. So it's really, I think, therefore something that those in power and those who are making those policy choices have to ensure is happening in order for that not to. It doesn't need to just be people who are kind of activists, who are middle class, who are privileged, who can think about it.
Yeah. Does anybody want to add anything to that, or any? Yes, Phoebe, I know you're going to be on later, but go on, add something now, please do, go.
Environment being seen as a middle class thing, and I think the kind of transition into climate justice is a really key moment for the fight against the climate crisis, and I think that wildlife needs a similar climate justice moment, or like the biodiversity crisis needs some kind of bent on that, because currently I would think that lots of people think that wildlife is still something that live in national parks enjoy or access national parks, but actually you should see that as a right, the same way that we see wanting clean air and an inhabitable climate right.
Right, so I reckon that's a whole event to discuss, being the right to nature. I think that's an interesting thing to explore. Does anybody want to add anything to this, or we can now start to rotate the panelists? We got, yes, please.
Don't you think that under COVID, ordinary people became much more aware of nature and much more aware of the value of it at all levels? I mean, yes, maybe a lot middle class, but I think a lot of people sort of locked down recognised it in a way that they hadn't before. And is there a way to build on that rather than let it go? Because now we are entering this cost of living crisis, but we have got something there, and how do we sustain that there?
Right. So, I mean, anyone can answer these questions. I mean, this is, I suppose, the whole point of this event. It doesn't have to be the panelists answering that. If someone wants to answer that question or ask another one, or if you want to just jump in, you have to jump in. This is interactive. I can't have my eyes everywhere, so go for it.
I mean, I would agree massively with that point. I think that the challenge then is sort of joining the dots between, you know, you've gone out on more walks, you've gone into the Peak District, you've gone into the Lake District, you've maybe done things you hadn't done before. What is the connection between that and, you know, the plight faced by ground nesting birds, or, you know, the river pollution, or, you know, actually making people think a little bit more critically about the natural environment around them? And I think that is sort of starting to happen, but it's not just kind of experiencing it. It's kind of, you know, what are some of the issues being faced by nature, and how can we fix them? I think that's the next conversation that we sort of need to have.
How we fix them, right? Or how we talk about them maybe first, because I'm not sure that stuff is talked about very much.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit the problem, because people have viewed getting into nature as a pastime. It's been a nice day out. And we will be able to go into empty environments and have a nice day out, and it'll be beautiful and enriching at one level. But I tend to think in terms of diversity and abundance of species, and it's invisible to so many people, and the world is emptying. You know, we have all the data under the sun to show us that the world is emptying in front of us. And it's very hard for humans to kind of track that.
But is that, sorry to jump in, but I will. Is that in the developing world? Whereas in Namibia, and I'm just kind of using that one country because I kind of went to it 2 years ago, there's a lot of wildlife which is still there. It's
There's
not
a hell of a lot more.
Yes, it isn't emptying in the developing world.
Sorry, was that it isn't emptying?
It isn't emptying as fast as in the developed world. Or has emptied.
There you go.
Right.
It emptied, historically, it emptied far faster in the developed world.
Yeah. Okay.
But, you know, we are dealing with wildlife populations that may be more obvious. You know, you sort of bring out Namibia and African savanna-y type ecosystems, and we'll still see thousands of things gracing the plains. But there were 10, 20 times that. So the functions that these animals played in their environments have drastically changed over time, and stuff becomes functionally extinct before it becomes physically extinct.
Right.
Yeah, can I say that I think.
And then this lady, yes, go on. I think this lady's turn now. I want to keep things moving and give people a fair chance, so I might have to hold you on that. Yes, please. And then I'm going to.
We've definitely done that.
Yeah, get ready for the next two. Okay. Yes, please, ma'am.
But do we, I guess back to the point of like the middle class, it's mostly a middle class issue. Do you really think it's a middle class issue, or that middle class folks have been the loudest? Because there's been grassroots groups and indigenous people and like marginalized groups who have been fighting for this for centuries, really, for that right. So would you just say that they've just kind of been ignored? But like, for like just challenging the notion that it's like a middle class issue.
I think we have a very Western-centric view of, you know, and I think, you know, in my own work, I very much focus on the UK. So yes, absolutely. But, you know, I was in America for a few years, and you know, became very aware of the work that Indigenous people are doing there. You know, they've been at the absolute forefront of climate activism, and probably our American colleagues are further along down that line. You know, I see a lot of really amazing American climate journalism coming out that is really, you know, acknowledging of that. So, you know, we maybe need to be a little more international in our thinking as well. So
Sure, but just on that note, this is going to unravel, isn't it? A lot of those indigenous people are also hunting wildlife as well. I mean, there are some big conversations which we in the West sometimes foist our ideological views onto and say we just want the nice human bit, we don't like the killing bit. And I think we have to be careful, this is my view, my personal view, we have to be careful how we project some of those environmental views on indigenous people who are looking after the environment, but also hunting, and that's why I've got it in the heading. And we can move on to some quite controversial issues maybe later related to that. Shall we rotate, or if you want to add something? Sorry, was it? Yes, go on, Patrick. Yes, over there.
I just wanted to, I guess, challenge your question. I think it's silly to box off cultural issues. We're wearing cotton clothes. We all drink water. We all eat food. We all live in houses that use materials from the natural world. It's not a class issue. This is something that we're given to technical mathematical stuff.
I agree with you completely, but I think we've got to be a bit careful because we started a discussion largely centric about what's happening in the UK. And then we've globalized it. And we've just said, oh, hang on, wait, we're talking about, biodiversity justice and indigenous rights and things like that. And yeah, we're dealing with globalized supply chains. So where the hell did the cotton come from and all this kind of stuff? Absolutely. And I think we just got to be a bit careful in our narratives that we contextualize what it is we're talking about with reference to where we're talking about it. I think if we're talking about the UK, I think it is fair to say that it has been large. I mean, we are class-ridden, whether we like it or not, in the UK a little bit. And so it's fair to say where the drive and care has come from. But I think to Phoebe's point about that sense of justice and the sense of youth in particular, we saw this, really strongly around COP26 and various other things, where young people are saying, this is not good enough. This has to change. This is my future. And we're maybe not necessarily seeing that. We are seeing it, but not to the same extent in the nature debate. And we have to. That's not to say there are amazing young people out there who are screaming loudly about the state of nature in our country right now. But their voice isn't, that we need to add to that. And I think see some anger in there a little bit as well.
Okay. Yes, you want to add something?
To maybe a devil's advocate here, but with the comment around the middle classes and what you're just saying, you actually referenced COP26 and not COP15 next year. There's an assumption there that there's a finite amount of people's attention and resources that can be put to this. Is the biggest threat to biodiversity not climate change, and should we be putting efforts into creating a debate around biodiversity and nature and not just funneling all the efforts we have into climate change?
Well, we can leave that. Anyone else in the room want to answer that, or we can change? Well, as we move the hot seats, anyone can think of an answer to that. Go on, Olivia.
Yeah,
please.
I mean, I think there's a reason that it's focused so much on climate change, and I think the narratives are much, in a way, like clearer and simpler about climate change. I think that's why, from a journalistic perspective, obviously they're still really complicated, but it's kind of it's quite a unified global issue in a lot of ways, whereas biodiversity, it's so multifaceted, from literally one habitat within the UK to the next field over. You have different issues, you have different types of management that's needed. And I think for that reason, I'm not saying that's, that makes it correct, but I think that, because we're still in our infancy in that conversation. And I do think, if you look at, for example, the government's ELMS policy and the way that our agricultural policy is changing, the understanding of kind of how we manage our land is becoming more sophisticated. And again, I have such a UK focus, so, probably other people can talk more internationally, but I do see that conversation, even in the few years that I've been doing this, becoming a bit more sophisticated among lay people. So, yeah, I think, maybe that's a hopeful note. I don't know.
Okay, great. Yes, go on.
I'd just be curious for all panelists, so I'll probably repeat the question, but what do you feel is the greatest barrier right now, let's keep it UK just to keep it simple, to meaningful change related to climate change or biodiversity? What your kind of particular heartfelt issue is? What is the greatest barrier that you could remove if you could?
I think for me, it's government policy and the way they're communicating their policy or failing to communicate their policy. I think they're leaving a lot of open space for sort of misreadings and sort of, maybe for people who have other agendas to kind of come in and shape the narrative, because they're not being proactive enough in shaping the narrative. And I think we are at a bit of a moment of danger in terms of the road that we go down, and it looks a lot different, I think, from how it did even a year ago. And yeah.
So how would you shape that narrative?
I think
if you were let's just say the Prime Minister, how would you shape it?
I would just be a lot clearer about where all the money's going to come from, and who's going to have to pay for everything. And for example, I would be rolling out mass insulation projects. I would be, making sure that people are not worried about how they're going to heat their homes. I would be being really reassuring about that and saying, look, you're not going to be colder, you're not going to be poorer. And they are saying that, but that we need the specifics, and we haven't had that, and loads of
Sorry, yeah, okay. But do you think there's a bit of a tension against, I think someone mentioned climate justice, and I sense that means that certain people can't be in the room because they need to pay reparations for oil and gas, just to use an example from the past, but yet they may also be the people who can have the money to funnel into this kind of revolution as to how we pay for, because that's what you've just said, it's paying for it. It's not organic farming, it's not how we eat differently, it's how we pay for it. And I would argue that we do need everyone in the room, and whether we like them or not, and we say, we don't want you because you've got to play, you have to pay you have to pay your reparations, but otherwise we're going to do justice against you. Is there more, are we getting too tribal and cutting voices out of the room because we don't like them?
Is that a question for me specifically?
Well,
who's we in that question? What do you mean by we?
Sorry, you are the Prime Minister, so
I see. Oh, sorry, I forgot.
So
Yeah.
I'm representing the voter.
I see.
Because I'm going to vote you in or out based
Right,
on
of
where
course,
my
yeah.
taxes are going. And this is what it's coming down to. We can
Yeah.
talk the good stuff about environment, but who's paying for it? We are, and we're going to vote you in or out. And that's where the tension is. I just want to unpick that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem. I think that's the challenge that they face, and they haven't really. I think they're being maybe quite hesitant about. There's been a lot of policy decisions that have been kicked down the road and delayed, and now they're much more difficult to make because of the cost of living crisis.
Yeah. And that is, So
yeah.
basically, politics and keeping the voters happy and stopping food riots trumps environmental policy, delivering environmental benefits at this exact moment.
So is this where private sector becomes more active than government and more progressive?
I think, well, there's someone in the room, but I won't
Question
ask
mark.
him to come to the forward, but I think there are, you're not going to come off, are you? No, but there are private
Being
interests.
investment companies.
Yes,
are
natural
now
capital,
looking-
landowners who are doing things off their own back.
Yes, well, yeah. There's the landowning community.
And now managers and owners, it's everyone. Sorry.
Indeed. But we are being approached by a number of investment companies who are building big portfolios around nature. And why are they doing that? They don't, I mean, there may be some goodness of heart, and I'd be probably a bit cynical to say there wasn't. But why are they doing it? Shareholders and regular folk need to be asking the tough questions of the things they're investing in, and that's getting picked up, and companies are responding. And now there's a scramble for biodiversity happening.
Yeah, and we don't have the metrics on how to measure biodiversity because
industry upon industry inventing itself at the moment to provide said metrics.
On that exact note, let's change the chairs. Dustin, would you like to come up and
Right.
No, you don't want. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry guys, thank you for coming. No, one more. We can't just have Dustin on his own.
I'll bore you all to tears.
No, well, I'm just trying to. Guys, get brave. Phoebe, maybe now. Phoebe, yes, let's go for it. I mean, we could continue with that. Investment companies investing in nature, or we could change tack completely, and then it would probably come back to it. I'm going to change tack, unless you want to say something on that exact note. Go on, Dustin. I felt that you were. So.
Well, I mean, I think we have to decide what we want land ownership for. And right now what you're seeing in the countryside is loads of speculative capital flying in for carbon principally, but also a bit for nature. But I think, let's be honest, the people who are buying land for nature have no idea how to monetize it. They're just thinking, grab the land and we'll work it out later. The reason why that's a problem is because we think it's socially unfair for land ownership to be concentrated in the hands of those who have lots of money. The private sector is going to try to work out how to deal with that by separating land ownership from the ownership over carbon or biodiversity. But we are in the foothills, if that, of that conversation. But the thing I actually want to come back to, if that's all right, is the question over here about is the biodiversity crisis not simply reducible to climate? And the answer is no, unfortunately. So I started in climate change. That's where I cut my teeth. I've done energy systems, carbon capture and storage, renewables, all that kind of stuff. And I recently came out of leading the analysis on the National Food Strategy, and the reality is that it is food that is the principal cause of the biodiversity crisis. It's land use change, and the principal reason why we change land use is for cows, basically. I mean, that's the top thing, and then there are loads of other things that we eat. But if you want to solve the biodiversity crisis, we need to change first what we eat, and then secondly, how we farm. And climate is really important, but it's a bit longer term for the biodiversity crisis. And I'm pretty confident that if we solve the diet and the farming challenge, we will solve the kind of land use systems contribution to climate change.
Great point. Well, I mean, we could go everywhere with that. Have we got Dan online or not? He hasn't responded, has he? So Dan, I can't see from here. Can anyone read what is there anything on that? So Dan was supposed to be here, the food journalist, Dan Saladino. Sheila Dillon, also from the BBC Food Programme, was supposed to be here, but they got COVID at the last minute.
I don't see anything on
No, I don't see anything. There's a very nice picture of him, so he was supposed to be here, but we can still.
Ask a question.
Oh,
What about those not in the room that wish to comment?
Okay. Nina, that's over to you. I can't multitask that much.
But as an online individual, feel excluded. All very Islington.
Okay, right. Okay. Ooh.
Some of us are from South London, thank you very much.
Yes, come on, let's get angsty. South London. I'm from West Wales, so that's fine. Yeah, okay. Okay, well, we can let them. Right. No. Yes. Let's answer what Dustin said. Yes, Dustin. Or.
Just speaking about the UK, we use 70% of our land to grow food and an area equivalent overseas. And that is the principal reason why we don't have much nature in the UK. So we've just heard from the gentleman from ZSL, how basically there's not much nature left in the UK. It's because of the way we farm, and that is because of what we eat, in really, really simple terms. So if you think about what's driving deforestation in Brazil, it's principally our desire for cheap chicken, basically. For soya in that instance, but it's also cheap beef, although principally that's consumed by Brazilians rather than British people. So it's the food system that is the driver of the major changes in land use.
Are you not seeing big changes in the farming system?
I don't see much change, to be honest. I mean, I see a lot of rhetoric and I see a lot of wishful thinking, particularly on carbon sequestration in soils, but I don't see much change in practice. And that's in part because some of the things that you do that are good for, say, climate or land use are really not good on other grounds. So let me give you an example. When we were looking in the food strategy for what is low carbon nature efficient beef, we kind of wanted to believe that it was like happy cows in fields with nice hedgerows and all of that, but that's not true. It's hyper intensified American feedlot beef that you feed with grains. That is super carbon efficient and very land use efficient. It's also quite cruel, in my opinion. So our moral intuitions about what a good food system looks like are actually at odds with the different metrics you can throw at it. And that's a big part of the challenge. I think the other big part of the challenge is our imagination of what good looks like in nature is radically different from what conservation science is good like, certainly in the UK. We have this imagination of a kind of rural idyll, which is beautiful and a core part of what it is. I didn't grow up in the UK, in case my accent hasn't given me away, but what I think is the core of Britishness. But that intuition is radically different from what you would get if you spoke to the kind of Cambridge Conservation Science team for what would it take to restore biodiversity.
Do you not think ELMS will have changing subsidies in the UK surely going to drive a change in how we farm?
It should. It absolutely should. Whether it will, I think, is an open question.
I don't see how it couldn't.
We might end up reinventing the same system that we purport to leave. I think that's the big risk. And I think that's particularly the risk in the context of Ukraine. So you can see it very clearly in the EU, where the people are on slightly louder broadcast. So you've seen the calls to scrap the farm to fork strategy, which is the kind of green farming thing in light of, well, we need to grow more food because Ukraine. And basically it's a lie. If you removed Ukraine and Russia's grain production from global production, you'd go from an average available calories of about 2,800 per person globally to about 2,600 per person per day. Now, we would never lose all the production of all of Ukraine and Russia. That's an extreme scenario. We don't need to replace the lost production, certainly not in the short term, but you're seeing farm lobbyists say, we basically need to plow everything in order to replace this in a kind of short-term food security crisis. Hopefully I'm being controversial here.
No, sorry, no, well, I was going to ask a question. We've got lots of hands coming up now. Because, I mean, I'm not sure whether we should, first of all, explain ELMS is an environmental land management schemes being brought forward through the new Agricultural Act after 70 years of a previous Agricultural Act. We've now got these new ideas, but ELMS is about environmental, whereas which is providing public goods, whereas food security is nothing to do with ELMS per se. It might be related to the soil condition. So it's a very fast-moving area, but I can see what you're saying, that lobby groups, because of the insecurity around food, are pushing in there. Does media have a role? I mean, this is a slight question to media. Do they have a role to challenge some of the lobbyists to provide some of the context, rather than just allow them to have a straight platform?
Yes.
Yes.
I work for The Guardian, I think we have. I'm not, I haven't written specifically about this area, but I do think that we are challenging that narrative.
Okay, right. It's a pity Ben Webster couldn't make it because he's got COVID from the Times. He was going to be here today in the hot seat. Anyway, sorry, go on. Yes, there were some hands up, so let's. Yeah. Okay.
So I work for Green Alliance, we're an environmental think tank. I previously worked for the National Food Strategy in DEFRA, so that's my bias. I want to save nature and stop climate change.
Okay.
How do we get there in UK or in general? Like, how do we move away from food consumption and how do we solve the food crisis?
That's an easy question.
Are we talking about the UK or kind of globally? Because I think that's.
What are your broad ideas around? Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and other people, I'd like to hear your ideas as well. I don't want too much of dust in. It was good stuff, but we want to. Go.
Shall I
Yeah.
give a
No,
brief,
go. No, you've been asked the
reply?
question.
So, you need to change both farm systems and diets. And the reason is that if you don't shift diets, you have to farm really, really intensively. So let me just give some numbers to put a bit of context on this. In the wealthy worlds, the UK included, we eat about double the amount of protein we need to be healthy, and that's mostly in the form of meat. Meat is really resource intensive, and I hate this as an environmentalist because I really don't want to have to talk about meat. It's super emotive. It's the worst place to start the conversation, but 85% of the land footprint that feeds the UK goes to meat, and that provides a third of our calories. The 15% of land that grows crops provides provides 2/3 of the calories that we consume. And that's true basically in the wealthy world. You can see that if you just look at crop production. So the UK feeds half the grain that it grows to animals. In Germany, it's 70%. In Canada, it's 80%. If you want to feed the world, and we did this during the Second World War, you have to reduce the amount of meat that you eat because it's so resource intensive. 100 calories of grain goes into a cow, you get 3 calories of human edible food out of it. It's great. This is not a kind of veganism seminar. It's just saying we need to eat a bit less so that there's space. So we need to shift our diets. And my view is that alternative proteins, kind of plant-based stuff, precision fermentation, is the easiest drop-in kind of fix the problem type of techno solution. So I'm quite optimistic about that. And we need to use the gains that we get from a less resource intensive diet to change our land use. And I think that crudely, we need to think of land in 3 buckets. So you've got land that is highly productive, and unfortunately, Ukraine is really highly productive land. 1/4 of the best soils in the world are in Ukraine. So we really should want the war to end quite swiftly and to be able to regain access to all of that lovely cropland. There's a whole another story there.
Yeah, though we don't access that. That's mainly for Africa and other places need the food coming out of there. We don't import much directly from Ukraine per se.
We import a lot of sunflower oil, and
Yes.
half the
Yes,
crops
but
that go into our biofuels come from Ukraine. But yes, you're right.
sure, they're not the main. I mean, we export 180 million's worth of pesticides to the Ukraine to grow the stuff.
So you need your high intensity land, but you've got to reduce the inputs that go into that and make sure that the pesticides and the fertilizers don't run off into the rivers. Yeah. Then you need some wild land or semi-natural land in the beautiful British term that we have. That's basically the space where pollinators and whatever fauna that you can see with your naked eyes live in. We desperately need that. And that's partially because native habitats tend to store the most carbon. So we need restored peat bogs and we need new forests. And then there's a really interesting bit in the middle, which is where the British imagination is most comfortable. It's your happy farm with a bimbly cow and nice thick hedgerows full of buzzing and kind of all of the fecundity of your imagined kind of 1930s Britain. That can be an enormous part of the British land system, but you get much more of it, weirdly, if you eat less meat, because it's very inefficient in kind of scientific terms, but it's also beautiful, and it's also an essential part of what is British rurality.
Which is, sorry to jump in, which is very like Transylvania, which I understand that Prince Charles thinks is wonderful, but when I traveled through there, it's subsistence, raw farming. They're all on the breadline, and it is very beautiful. 1 or 2 cows, most of them in a small shed, so you could call that intensive farming. So I think some of our perceptions on the bucolic, can be framed in lots of different ways. Yes, I mean, I think there's lots of stuff to explore. Wild land. We could start to talk about rewilding, because of course, when you rewild stuff, the unsaid argument of that is that you must intensify food production to make way for more real land. But maybe we're getting too deep. Any points on what Dustin said? Yeah, Simon, I think you had something.
I think we've got to put it in context. We are more self-sufficient now in the UK with food than we were in the First World War by a long, long way. I mean, I couldn't disagree with eating less meat, and that's clearly the right thing to do in terms of maintaining resources. But we are very single-minded on this, and what we've done is put energy, through fertilizer largely, into farming. Yields globally have gone up 3 times. Our grain area in the world is almost exactly the same as it was 50 years ago, excluding that grain. I'm being specific there. It is. We have created space. I mean, probably the biggest moral problem is something like organic production, which actually reduces your food consumption. It actually probably relies on beef, and it does. I've done a lot of work in Ethiopia. I've done work in Congo, and we actually starved those people. Last time grain prices came up to where they are now, consumption in imports into Egypt fell like a stone. We've got to think broadly with rich people in London and the world's a bigger place. Not knocking most of what you said at all. I'm just saying we need it in context. We need to focus on responsibility. Elms is going to do nothing. Elms is this rehash of an old system. It is exactly the same as we've seen years and years and years. For a lot of people, it's an excuse to make everybody redundant, rent out to farmhouses, rent out your building, and the morally superior. It's a complicated world, but it's a very different environment.
Okay. Anyone want to add yes or come up against that? Not that point. On that, or a point.
Dustin, what do you find are the most convincing arguments that you hear back against your plan?
The most convincing arguments are about livelihoods in rural culture, and I think that's the core of the divide on Elm, and part of the reason why I'm also, unfortunately, becoming more pessimistic about it. The argument goes something like, there is something deep and essential about the practice of farming in the UK, and particularly more economically vulnerable farming, upland farming particularly. And we need to retain that as an important part of our cultural heritage. And you can't do that whilst also optimizing inputs and all that kind of stuff, the more scientific approach that I've just outlined.
Okay, so how many people would be happy? So I'm doing a very quick asking a question, a quick poll. How many people would pay more taxes for upland farmers not to produce food, but just to continue to live in the uplands and to be in the pub and to maintain the landscape and the Lake District? Anybody, any hands up there?
No environmental benefits.
Yeah, no, environmental, kind of landscape, cultural. Well, are we talking about environmental benefits or environmental? Or cultural, which is what Dustin's talking about. This is a livelihood, which is not environmental. The Lake District has just been made a UNESCO site to freeze it in aspect. What you're paying for, okay, I'm going to ask you to pay more taxes so that people can live in the uplands, maintain the landscape, live in the community, have farms, run livelihoods, keep the Lake District on the front cover of Countryfile magazine. You're not interested. That's right. Tell me more.
That's so
yeah.
reductive to what it means to be a farmer.
Sure,
Like,
sure. I'm
farmers-
being provocative.
and
I did.
I think that.
So tell me what it's like to be a farmer.
Okay, well, my mother's a farmer, but I think implicitly in your question is the suggestion that farmers farm livestock and nothing else. And farmers are going to be farming natural capital, they're going to be planting trees. The role of a farmer is going to be diversified, and hopefully Elms will facilitate that role of a farmer in looking at it in a broad sense. So I think taking the example of upland farmers, there are already tree planting schemes which upland farmers are involved in. I think farmers know landscapes incredibly well, and that knowledge should be harnessed. And I don't think it's productive to vilify farmers and blame them for what you perceive to be the destruction of the countryside. And I agree with you about food production, meat and kind of eating beef and lamb. We clearly need to reduce our meat, and the farming system we have in the UK is the main driver of biodiversity decline. But to kind of put that on individual farmers, I think is wrong. It's a system we've been operating within. We need to change that system, and we have to bring farmers along with it. Yeah. And I think,
yeah, very good.
I think you see this kind of overlooking of human rights, and none of this environment stuff works unless it works for the people that live in those places. So they have to be financially remunerated properly for elms, not just tokenistic money. They have to have a livelihood. And back to your question earlier about Indigenous rights, again, people have this perception that we can create protected areas and just, it doesn't, get people, well, historically, lots of fortress conservation has negatively impacted human rights. So we have to do human rights, human focused conservation and work with the environment. I think that's where we're going to see fruitful things, not suggesting that we're going to subsidize Cumbrian Hill farmers to go and have a pint in the pub.
Yeah. But what about planting trees in the uplands? I mean,
that's happening.
Yeah, well,
I mean, people have this massive discourse about rewilding the uplands, like we're just going to reforest the uplands. And unfortunately, as much as many of us think that sounds great, this is a very complex cultural landscape with people who have a right to that land, and they've been farming in that way for hundreds, or I mean, most of the trees in the uplands have been gone for thousands of years. So to suggest that we're going to rewild it with kind of a click of a finger is absurd.
We're talking about tree planting or rewilding, because there's two separate things.
Because I think that this tree planting, I've written about this, you should all read this article about that there already is this fantastic work happening, fencing off parts of the uplands and planting trees. And that will create a seed base for further reforestation of the uplands. And that is the start of rewilding in the uplands. I do think it's happening, and it's going to be slow, and it's incredibly frustrating because there are still a lot of sheep. So it's expensive.
But that's not farming. I mean, I'm the son of a forester who went to kind of Welsh Hill farmers in the 1970s, and he bought up huge tranches on behalf of the government in order to do afforestation. And it was fine then, but today you should see what the Foresight did from the middle of London. They went into Wales, and I don't know if you saw what happened, but there was a huge kickback from all the Welsh farmers saying, no way, you won't plant trees on my upland farm.
We're totally, if we need to achieve what we do need to achieve, which I think lots of people in this room are in agreement with, we need to completely reinvent what it means to be a farmer. And I have spoken to farmers who are upkeeping these fenced off areas. They're getting paid to do so. They want to do so. They are reducing flooding downstream. There's a huge public benefit in that. So they're absolutely key in delivering these schemes. It's happening on their land. It's happening on common land, which they have rights to.
Farming expertise, that's the problem. I mean, my history used to be bowmen. There's no room for bowmen. What we were probably good at national court, but we're not needed now, apparently. You know, it's not a farming skill. This is the problem. You know, farming skills are different, and that's why investment companies come in and plant all land, because the expertise is no longer there.
I mean, lots of companies, my colleague Patrick's written about this, are terrible at planting trees.
There are plenty of people who are good. You know, Rob's family, you know, very good at planting trees. You know, it's not.
Well, he was working for the Forest Commission. It wasn't.
Farmers don't plant trees.
Farmers will, they will be planting trees.
Yeah, they will.
And they'll be looking after them. And actually, I really disagree with that, because we've planted
Excellent.
350 trees on my parents' farm. And we know the species, land, we know what species goes well. We will look after them. We're on that land the whole time. And that is crucial. We'll have, well, if I could, I didn't get a grant to plant these trees, but I think there are grants available to plant trees. So I would 100% I should get that grant, and I will get like a very high percentage success rate, because I know that land well, and I know what tree species go well where.
Okay.
And that's the farmer's knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I planted my land, but I didn't get any grant because I wanted to plant exactly what I wanted, which is a whole lot of mixed native and non-native trees, because I didn't want to have to go through the red tape of being told what to do. Great. I mean, there's room. Do you have a question earlier, or does that come?
Well, no, it was a little bit.
As loud as you can to the room, because I know we haven't got a roving mic. Sorry, I know that we're aware.
It was a little bit. So I agree with what you were saying about the sort of the rights of people living in the land. We have this weird mentality where we feel like in the UK we can write roughshod over all sorts of things, but we've got to be very delicate about people's rights overseas and respecting rights and thinking about future conservation, which is the right thing to do. We just don't apply the same lessons back home.
Right.
But my question was more coming back to the role of journalism and the media, because the environmental debate in the UK seems to constantly be one of polarized views. And it's so easy to vilify farmers because that's a bloody narrative that just keeps coming up again and again. And it's very reductionist, it's very simplistic, it's just not true. But it's reinforcing something that I think puts farms in a position of defensiveness right from the get-go. And somehow we have to break out of that mold into something that's far more nuanced and actually collective action to solve a problem.
Okay. Well, let's work with that.
How do we get out of that?
Sorry, do you want to, yeah.
No, Minette Batter said at COP, she said, farmers are the eco workforce of the future. And they're not, in my opinion, currently, but that is, farmers and the split between farming and conservation is so potent in the UK. I see it so much. And I do think we're definitely making an effort to break that down. And I do think our coverage has reflected the fact that we're moving beyond that, maybe in some small way, but I do think we're probably moving in the right direction on that. I mean, my colleagues are here, they could comment.
No, we'll come on to that. Dustin, you've been having your hand up for a bit, and then I think we should, how long we got? Another roughly half an hour-ish? Okay, and then we're going to rotate because we've got some more people, David, I think, and Amy. David and Amy maybe next, and then Patrick and maybe someone else have that.
I want to try to answer the question of how do we turn this into a more productive conversation. And I'm reminded of a really excellent thinker called David Mackay, who on the climate side of things was enormously frustrated with the conversation about 10 or 12 years ago about, should you switch off your phone charger overnight or should you build a wind turbine? And his point, he was a physicist, and his point was, switch off the mobile phone charger if you want, but it is, 1/10,000th of the value of building a wind turbine. So let's think about relative scale. To your point about planting the uplands with trees, we did the analysis in the National Food Strategy. How many trees do we need to meet our carbon targets, and how many trees, if you planted mixed broadly for nature reasons, would you want to hit the UK's 30% of the country protected for nature by 2030 kind of goal? And you basically need that, well, the economically optimal way of doing it would be to take the lowest 20% most productive land, which tends to be in the uplands, make sure that there's no peat there because you don't want to plant trees on peat, and you cover about 14% of that 20% of land with trees. And that's enough trees. You know, I mean, we could plant more, and there are lots of good reasons to do so. But if you're looking for the minimum threshold, that's the level. The problem is we have an imaginary discussion where it's like either idyllic fields in your imagination or a kind of dark forest, you know, where the wolves lived, and it's one or the other. So I feel like a few numbers help to leaven the conversation with reasonableness. Similarly, some other numbers where, to pick up your point about could we have farmers provide the workforce, could they be the eco-warriors? Well, yes, absolutely, we have that social choice. It is not the cost optimal approach. So if I were in the Treasury and I was saying, what is the best bang for my buck? And I will use carbon as a proxy for other numbers. And I want to get carbon benefits out of upland afforestation. I can spend between £3 and £10 per tonne and paint the uplands of Britain with conifers. Now that will get you all the carbon savings you need, and it's a very cost-effective thing to do. I could, on the other hand, say, I want your family's, I presume, farm somewhere. I'm going to pretend it's in the uplands. I have no idea. It's not, okay, well, let's pretend it's in the uplands. Let's say your family are sheep farmers. I want to guarantee your family a good livelihood, so more money than they make today. I want to pay for broadleaf rather than conifers because I want the nature value as well as the carbon savings. And I don't want to have to constantly chop down the trees because I'm trying to grow a kind of future ancient woodland. I'm maximizing my biodiversity. I can do that for about £75 per tonne of CO2. So it's a lot more expensive, 10 call it, versus 75. But the traded carbon price in the UK is now north of £75 per tonne. So it's economically rational to do this, but it's more expensive. And my argument would be we should pay those higher costs to retain the kind of social status of the countryside, to not turf your family off their land and instead sell it to some private equity company that plants conifers at vast scale. But we need an honest conversation to say we're doing a less cost-effective but much more socially beneficial transition.
Right, so we could, yes. Okay.
If you want to carpet the uplands in conifers, I think because of land rights.
But that's not what he said. He said he wanted
No,
broadleaf.
but just like I'll get back to that. But that some of those options are just not possible because how would you, for instance, the land rights to commoners who have rights to graze animals on the uplands, what would you do with them?
I'll give you my evil genius plan. This is not my actual plan, but it's my alternative evil genius. I would withdraw the basic payment, and if you do that, you essentially make 40% of British farms bankrupt overnight. You then have a fire sale of all their assets. So let's pretend you're a fictitious upland farming family. They go, holy crap, like we were marginal economically before. Now we are dead in the water. We can't borrow. We can't even afford to buy this year's sheep, basically. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do? Private equity firm, comes along and says, we will buy your land. We'll give you a better price than the guy next door. And you go, well, I can starve or I can sell my land. Boom. Doing that, you've got 40% of farms like that you could transition over to blanket conifer woodland. It would be very cost effective. It would also be massive cultural vandalism, but it's certainly imaginable.
Right, okay, let's keep, I want to keep giving this a question there, and then I think we must rotate quite soon. I mean, there's lots of subjects, and I sense we might have gone down a very interesting rabbit hole then, which is my fault as well, which was good, because it was embracing some of the unspoken thoughts I think sometimes we don't always hear about. A quick question over there, please.
So a bit of background about myself. I'm a corporate reporter at the Telegraph, so I actually the other side of this. So speaking to private equity firms, speaking to a lot of people who are actually going to buy, for example, this side. And I think what's really worth noting about that side of it is that the direct profit from actually doing so is relatively negligible. Profit that they're getting is actually from the indirect brand exposure, or being able to put it on a poster, or being able to say that hologram is ESG. And this is kind of the way that they are profiting. And I think that what's also a crucial part of this, from my perspective as someone who environmental reporting is part of my job, but most of my job is calling up Barrett and asking why they're building houses in stocks with then like it's a much more incidental part of my report.
Corporate environmentalism, I like it. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's a much smaller part. But the issue is that basically, if you are Brewdog is the prime example of this.
Yeah, we know what happened there.
Exactly, they're now trying to plant a load of trees in a place where they are not going to take because it helps chief executives to put it on advertisers. Helps them kind of advertise in this manner.
Couldn't it? Sorry, just jump in. Okay, so Brewdog went up to Scotland and they wanted to buy up a big tranche of land for afforestation. Again, this is down to semantics. What kind of trees? I would argue, kind of diversity of different tree species. I think it went south because of their technique, their social technique of coming into the local community as to how they unfurled their request to do it.
And partially, it was also partially, again, to speak to they lacked expertise. This was a bunch of big companies trying to do something that is not their expertise, and that this is a marketing ploy for a vast majority of these companies, I think it's fair to say. So they're not going to hire the right consultants, they're not going to hire the right people managing the land, and that is leading to leisure. I think one thing that's crucial in terms of what can we do immediately that will help solve these issues is actually force proper disclosure around these lands and force proper disclosure around especially carbon offsetting, because like Aviva has bought a huge swathe of land in northern Scotland that is a peat field. In the way that ESG disclosing works.
Sure, but I mean, obviously, lots of rewilders have, kind of bought over the years thousands and thousands of acres.
Who has more money?
So this is back to money.
Yeah, the issue is if the value of doing this increases, you're going to have more people who fundamentally have more money who will come in. And the way that the accounting system for this currently works is if they leave it alone, don't touch it, they are carbon positive just by not demolishing it, which is a perverse incentive. And you have thousands of perverse incentives to continue doing this. So you need proper disclosure programs, and you need to actually get incredibly, like, for example, Barclay, the housing developer, just that's my last one.
No, I was going to ask you a question. I was going to ask the immediate, go on.
Barclay, the housing developer, I cover them. It's a big part of my job to know the ins and outs. They have 744 subsidiaries. I cannot simply track the ownership of each one, what they are doing with each one, what their individual peats, what they're doing on each land, and their rewilding issues there. It is physically impossible unless you force a higher level of corporate exposure, and the only way you are going to do that is via regulations and via onshore. And this is before we get to the whole issue of companies claiming to be quote-unquote net zero. I had one construction firm claim they were net zero because they didn't take any flights to their Brazilian subsidiary 1 year, which is obviously nonsense. And that's because they're buying carbon offsets and they don't actually know the value of their data. So disclosure is absolutely key if you want any kind of forward step in the private sector, which is so crucial.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And do journalists? Okay, let's do the chain. David, please, and Amy. Do journalists have enough time to do that scrutiny? Right, they don't. So what happens when you get a press release, which sounds really good because there's notes to the editor, there's the whole package, it comes through to you. It's too easy to print because it's got a nice kind of angle from both sides, it's polarized, so it's going to sell ratings. But have you got time to scrutinize the transparency about what's really going on behind it?
So I think this is kind of the key point that we've got a number of really environmental journalists at today whose job it is to fundamentally understand these issues. My incentives in my work, I've done reports about environmental stuff, and my incentives are understanding what the house builders are doing, their profit and loss sheet, and similar things like that. And it is the exact same. I'm quite lucky the Telegraph will give me lots of time to look into stuff. If you are at a company that gives you significantly less time, if you're at the Daily Mail and you're covering 60 different companies, you do not have time to remember the CEO's name, never mind the actual full details of what their ESG plans are.
So what pressure is on you to publish that? I mean, either from your editor saying, oh, that's a good story, come on, fill the gap, it's a nice angle, and you're going, I'm not sure.
So the part of that, and this is where kind of the outside of the media is really helpful, is just getting that information to reporters. And if you see it covered before, not in a confrontational way, but in a way of going, look, I've seen you've got Aviva, for example, done deals with car accidents in Scotland to buy up this it's worth noting that this man do X. They have got a minimal carbon footprint here. Here's ways you can get into it. I suggest speaking to X. Like one of the house building, one of the reasons that the cladding campaign has been so successful in the non-environmental sphere is they absolutely blunt the heart. As soon as I do a story about cladding, I get 70 emails, all of them incredibly helpful. All of them have all the details, everything attached to it. And it's got to kind of be in a way of guerrilla campaign of going, here is the information about this topic. It's worth saying, like, one of the CEOs of one of these companies once told me, so I jokingly went, I pay around £400,000 for a comms and PR department. There's only 3 national journalists in the UK who cover this.
Right.
We are outnumbered.
Okay.
You need to help and kind of get that information out. Otherwise, that private side, and as soon as the financial incentives continue for those companies to do this, it's only going to get worse.
Great, thank you. Right, interesting. I mean, this is a very general question. Thank you very much for joining me up on the panel, David and Amy. My random question is, and you may not have heard of the State of Nature report. I know, David, this might not be your area, but it's the idea that the State of Nature report is this big partnership of environmental organizations. Every 3 years, they bring out this huge report about the state of nature in the UK and UK kind of land ownership across the world. And in 2016, the report came out, but it was leaked to the Sunday Times the day before David Attenborough launched it. So the media ran with the leak, thus framing the situation in a very catastrophic way. How does the media, this is a general media question, how does the media face up to provocative leaks and say, no, that should not go on Country File and be leaked to the Sunday Times the day before it was officially launched?
I'm one of those evil PR people, I'm afraid, so you're asking the wrong person. But
Or the right person.
I think it's really, really difficult for journalism. I mean, this is me looking from the other side, and I deal with issues and crisis in agriculture, because you need to get the airspace, you need to get the attention, and negative stories always are going to attract more attention. So I think it's really, really hard. And it's such a competitive environment now. I have no idea how media outlets survive, quite frankly, given the level of digital, fragmentation that's going on. However, having looked at communications and how you get change and how you drive change, and it was something that I think, Sophie, you said earlier on about nudging, about positivity, about making things easy and attractive and social and timely, all the behavioral insights, all the behavioral change cues. And the problem is what I'm seeing in farming, I'm going to switch it to farming because I don't know enough about that subject. We talked earlier about doubling down and farmers being portrayed as, as evil, as villains, as the people who are destroying the planet and so on. You don't get change that way. And I think this binary nature of the argument at the moment is very hard because the media are needing to report to fulfill their commercial objectives, to get coverage, to get circulation, to get advertising. But at the same time, we need that more nuanced debate to actually get change. And one example of this is in the antibiotics, use of antibiotics in farming, which I was involved with for 5 years. And when we started out in 2016, we had a situation where farming was being absolutely blamed for drug-resistant infections in human medicine, absolutely the cause. Now, what happened is that farming was refusing to engage, saying it's not our fault, it's not us, it's human medicine. And there was this standoff. And what we did actually in farming is we said, okay, this is a One Health issue. We all own this issue and we need to deal with it properly. We need to share responsibility. And because farming actually turned around and faced it and said, what can we do to actually change our bit of the responsibility? Suddenly, we started to get engagement in farming and people started to say, what can we do? And it absolutely changed the whole dynamic and they halved antibiotic use in 5 years. We're missing that at the moment. We're missing the can do. And what I'm seeing, just even coming down in the train today on climate change, is the whole, you know, I'm sorry, this is in The Guardian, but one of the pieces of coverage of the report yesterday had the picture of the meat on the hooks, because it was, you know, all about the meat, when actually the report itself that was covered in the piece had relatively little. There was one mention of diet in there. And this is the issue, is you attack a group and they will fight back and they will double down and they will go into siege mentality, and then they will lob their bit of information back, and that's all we get. So I would say, to come back to your point, Rob, that I think we need to at some point share some sort of responsibility for changing the nuance and to getting more common ground so we can all move this forward. But I don't know how you do that in the current media environment. And that's me speaking outside journalism.
Okay, right. David, that's a hell of a challenge, but we don't have to do antibiotics, but the general idea of how the media catastrophize, possibly how they put stuff across. Have you got any thoughts around
I mean, I think the remarkable thing is just how quickly, in the last 15 or 20 years, the environmental cause has gone completely mainstream. You know, it's one of the great powers in the land. You know, you were talking about all these companies who virtue signal. Okay, they may be cheating, but they are virtue signaling because they want their shareholders or customers to know that they're taking it seriously. It's been an extraordinary success story. The bald guy who was talking earlier, you know, he's an environmental activist. He was at the heart of government. I mean, you know, and the government is full of environmental activists.
Well, let's have a picture of
So, I mean, you know, if anything, I think there is a danger that, you know, it does irritate me when the BBC, you know, you have BBC presenters just using the phrase climate catastrophe without any explanation at all. I think there is a kind of degree of imbalance in the debate, or a kind of lack of sort of reasonable skepticism, a lack of kind of humility almost, a lack of kind of reasonable uncertainty about things, which I think we need in order to take people with us. Sorry to jump in.
I mean, so do you think the government do you think the government should express that uncertainty a bit better, or is it up to the private sector to pitch into the media to articulate that uncertainty and some of the moving parts around this, because it isn't as clear as possibly the media wants to portray it sometimes?
I mean, I don't know, but I think there is a danger it is going to become a very divisive issue. We were talking about the kind of class division on this earlier. You know, Nigel Farage is talking about, you know, kind of relaunching his career in opposition to the net zero target and all the distortions that is going to create. I think we're not. We get swept along by the big narrative. It does have a kind of quasi-religious aspect. You know, the Industrial Revolution was kind of original sin. It was the fall. There is the elect of environmental activists who are going to lead us to the promised land. There's indulgences. Carbon offsetting are indulgences. I mean, this isn't my subject, so. But you know, I think I'm a kind of.
But in a way, it is everyone's subject.
Consumer, yeah.
No, but I mean, that's the point: is that it is everyone's subject. Yeah. This is not. I know you want in on this. And
what I want to know is actually, I mean, you know, what the facts really are. Of course, people disagree about them, but what the absolute sort of certain facts are. The uncertainty within those facts, as it were, and what sacrifices are demanded of us. Because I mean, the dilemma for politicians is they look at what happened with the Gilets jaunes. This was a revolt against an environmental tax. They look at what happened at the last election in Australia, I think, where the kind of the people who were taking the environmental stuff seriously got beaten. You know, politicians are looking at that and they're thinking that. You know, beneath this kind of media sort of false consensus, there is a very skeptical public still, certainly very skeptical when it comes to making sacrifices.
Yeah, making sacrifices. Okay, let's hold that. You can come back, Amy, in a second. We've got lots of hands coming up. I think, Patrick, you were first.
I know you just said it's not your subject, which they are the major important best scientists as well. Funding is information you can read. I mean, you ask for information, it's there to read.
If you read the report, it is identical.
Yeah.
I read it today, and it literally is like, I don't know what they're saying.
I'm
sure, but that's a dispute that.
Well, no, I'm not disputing. I'm not disputing but the facts always need a kind of context, don't they? And if you get a kind of a reasonable skeptic, not about climate change, but about how we should deal with it, like Bjorn Lomborg, I'd be really interested in hearing what he has to say about the way that report has been presented.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to let you come in, but there is someone who did email me, and he was a senior social scientist for the government during COVID. I'm not going to say who he is, obviously, but there is. No, I'm not going to. But basically, there is quite a hint here.
No, not him.
No, I haven't put the name on here, but there is a hint that the scientific. He uses the word elite have not been able to frame some of their scientific facts to interpret them for the man, the woman, the person, got to be careful what I say now, on the street, the person on the street. So there is an issue between translating the fact of what the science is. And I was going to read it out, but maybe I won't. Wait a minute. Okay. Well, basically, people who accept the scientific method but disagree with the interpretations being placed on its outcomes by science elites. So there seems to be a bit of, there's a bit of tension between that, that report and people actually connecting with it on the street.
I just wanted, I think, the point about the nuance. I think there's a positive case to be made. You have to be a negative. You have to make sacrifices. That would be sort of my plea to the environmental movement. I see it as my job as a journalist is to hold the government to account, is poke holes in their policy. But I would much rather do that from a place of good faith, from a place of accuracy, and from a place of trying to improve the policy that should be happening, rather than from a place of some of the bad faith critiques that I think we've seen coming out. And I think if the environmental movement, if I had any criticism, my place to critique it, but if I had any critique, it would be that isn't happening, and it is creating a void that is then being filled by things that maybe are not. I think fracking is quite a good example. The argument that fracking is the answer to our energy crisis and that it's going to provide the UK energy security. I haven't seen good evidence of that. I think there are policy critiques that can be made, and they're not kind of coming from environmental groups. They're not kind of coming from what you might think of as sort of the mainstream environmental movement. And I think that's I see that as a journalistic challenge because I want to criticise the government, I want to critique government.
And also criticize each other, kind of critical friend role. There's a much stronger role to be able to, kind of criticize some of these kind of green narratives without being seen as a skeptic or a denier.
I totally agree with that. And I think this is one of the big problems. There's so much science out there to say that people respond better to motivational rather than sacrificial messages. There's this whole thing called cultural cognition, where you interpret reports exactly the way that fits with your worldview or your politics. And I think that the problem is that the nuance and the kind of the thing that Phoebe was talking about, bad farmer, good environmentalist, it's like actually there's good farmers, they're people. We're all a hodgepodge of good and bad, and there are just as many people who are really well motivated. But when I see on social media the attacks, so a really good example, methane, there is a really, really good opportunity here because methane degrades after 12 years. It's pretty much static in terms of its contribution to climate warming at the moment. But hey, farmers could actually be heroes if they reduced methane output by changing their practices, by improving health and nutrition, by feeding differently. They could reduce by maybe up to 30%. They could actually be contributing to climate cooling because of the way methane degrades. But they're not even looking at that because they're attacked constantly about causing climate change. And they're busy arguing a different question, which is who caused climate change and who caused the problem. And actually the question should be who can help solve it, and they could help solve it. But that isn't getting any airtime because they're too busy in siege mentality. So this is the problem we've got. is we have to find that common ground.
Very interesting. Yes. Okay. Yep. Yes. Yes, please. Yeah, it is. No, it's a good one. Yes.
I just wanted to ask who David is because
I'm a journalist and think tanker. I met Rob on Twitter, actually. I think I'm here because I bumped into him on Twitter. I
read your book. I did read your book, and
I'm Mr. Anywhere Somewhere. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Road to Somewhere, which was describing the education-based value divides in modern Britain that had contributed to Brexit. It came out just after the Brexit vote, and actually it is relevant, I think, to this argument that I remember looking for anywheres briefly are people like us, highly educated people, mobile, believe in kind of openness and enjoy novelty and change, and liberal graduates, 25% of the population, 50% of the population are somewheres who tend to be less well educated, more rooted, more attached to group and place, tend to value security and familiarity, tend to be not necessarily conservative, but more traditional sometimes in their outlook. I was kind of looking for ways of thinking, what are both of these worldviews are completely legitimate. They just happen to be in pretty radical conflict with each other. And so what are the things that can bring people together? And one of the things that can bring people together is, of course, the kind of common enemy of climate change. And I think I wrote about that when in the book. I actually think that was wrong. I mean, actually, climate change and the environment are a great divider along precisely these lines. I'm much more pessimistic about it now. I mean, I think Nigel Farage, from his own point of view, is absolutely right to kind of take on the carbon zero cause. This is it is about the distribution of sacrifice, and a lot of people are very skeptical. A lot of people who, as you were saying earlier, people who live from hand to mouth, do not think that they are, should have to bear that sacrifice.
Right, yes. I just on that note, I just want to read out an email which someone sent to me before this, which is entirely related to that, and it's from, again, someone who's an important person to do with this kind of discussion. We probably need to shift narratives and perhaps return to, I wish he was here, and return to the political heart of some of the issues. There is room on the right for conservatism in the conventional sense, and there is no need for every action promoted by the left to be described as radical. So there is this commonality, but this particular person, and he really wanted to be here. His concern, and this is his words, my growing concern at the start of the year is the return of the split in the climate journalism along the conventional and very boring right and left lines. And we need to be able to break that down somehow.
So what is that? Is that along the lines of left wing is we need to be governed from above, right wing we value our personal freedom, we don't want to be told what to do? What do you mean? What does that mean? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, I suppose it means something very different to everybody, but I'm not going to divide the left and the right. If everyone wants to come do that at this stage of the evening, because I know we're coming towards the end, we've got a couple of questions. We'll leave that hanging. Thanks, Amy. Some questions. There were some here. Then, Dustin, you've got a question. Any more questions? I think we're coming towards the end now.
Just be curious about hearing people's perspective about profit that's associated with kind of pushing the different narratives in the media. I'm obviously I have. Fox News, we have MSNBC, we have CNN, there's algorithms on any number of social media companies that profit by this division. You want to speak to how people are dividing for profit in media?
Can I just say this was actually the second point I wanted to make? I keep hearing this evening, the media, and I have a real problem with that because we've got the Telegraph in the house, I'm 15 years Al Jazeera, we've got a lot of different media in the house. And we keep hearing like the media and and for me that is, if we're talking about what are the different perspectives in the debate, by starting talking about the media as if it's moderated block, we're actually part of the problem if we frame it like that.
So how should we frame it? Are we saying we should split the media, as the chap says, into different alignments?
The word nuance, and I think there's nuance also applying to you know, what is their background. I really appreciated what you were saying from the Telegraph, and that is not my go-to paper. But I thought your contributions were actually really enlightening this evening. So I think, you know, rather than talking about the media and how do we split it and put everybody into camps, I think what I'm hearing is we're trying to not think about camps. So in a place like a Frontline Club, maybe we should also not treat the media as if everybody is in separate camps.
Yeah.
Very good.
Did you want to, or have you moved on? Go on. I'm sorry.
The gentleman asked the question.
Yes, sorry.
I was
No,
just
absolutely.
I was just going to say, I keep seeing stuff about big meat, big ag, big this, big that. I mean, I'm thinking about Phoebe's mother farming. I'm thinking about, I asked that question on Twitter the other day, what is big ag? And I was told it was the big pharmaceutical companies behind farming that are driving things, the big pesticide companies. But, you know, really it comes down to the consumers of those products are small businesses, small, mostly family businesses. What worries me slightly more is the big Silicon Valley investment in highly processed vegan products, which and the funding, the promotion of the Eat Lancet diet, all sorts of stuff like that is more concerning to me, because that's taking it out of the hand of small operators to mega big processing businesses. So that's my personal concern. But
Okay. Any comments on that before we go and kind of process ourselves at the bar and go and eat some food? No, you're fine.
No.
This sorry, that gentleman. As loud as you can.
I think one thing that is worth noting is that it's very easy to kind of put it into, X owns Y, so they're going to put it to, or this is going to happen. I think that's come from the US and understandable given the US media market, but I think it is completely different. I think I'm biased because I'm about to join them, but like the I is Daily Mail Group and has 2 specialist climate reporters who I don't think anyone in this room would instinctively say was anti-net zero, while that's deaths blindly with position to Daily Mail. I think a lot of people would say, they're more climate skeptic. I think there are always overarching themes within publications that mean that people go into a lot of that is anti-elitism and kind of the anti-establishment thing, which means that there is opposition to a lot of kind of scientific reporting on IPCC. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist, but equally comes back to the point that I was making earlier. We've published stuff saying about the hypocrisy of corporations, and we've been followed by the Daily Mail, we've been followed by the Express, and I think there is always an angle to make something work in every paper. And I think a lot of that is just flagging it if it's hypocrisy, if it's something else, if it's like Guardian obviously will cover that extensively, the academic, the policy side of that in a way that I think if we're being really realistic, the Express is not going to be okay.
That was an in-joke, I think, by the sounds of it. There was a little laugh from that corner. Okay, I think we're almost done. Yes, because we did have the Daily Mail were going to turn up this evening, and the Sun also, but you know, there's a war on and there's lots of COVID, etc. So we apologise for the fact we couldn't get everyone in the room, the different, you know, voices from the media. But hopefully we can do that again. I think there's yes, please, go.
So I'm a journalist from Vietnam, and I just want to add a little bit to your point about media and your perspective on coming from a place of accuracy and good faith. I want to expand the narrative a little bit, saying that the UK media is also being read globally in places like Vietnam, where articles from Telegraph, Al Jazeera, Guardian, Daily Mail are being translated indiscriminately. So and the people who have been translating it through the small to biggest media in countries like Vietnam, they don't have the understanding of political differences and divides in your country. So my point being is that I think that's another way for me to convince you to report from a place of as politicized as possible, because you are creating influences outside your country as well, without you knowing it, because you don't read it.
That's great. And also that's fantastic that you can get beyond the paywall, which I can't, in order to read half of this stuff. I think that's a natural end unless someone wants to draw something else, but I think we've had a good hour and a half. It has gone lots of different places. It was unanticipated. It was rumbustious in parts. Thank you very much, especially for the, I'm not going to name you all, but all those people that came up. I'm sorry Patrick didn't come up, any other people that wanted to come up. Thank you again, and also for the audience for your participation. Just a couple of points. Farming seems to be very much the discussion around environmental issues. It's a dominant narrative. And I think that on that note, we should go and eat some food. So thank you again, and thank you very much to the Frontline Club for hosting this.